The blade goes in below his ribs. He turns and sees the face of the man he loved like a son. 23 wounds, senators in white robes, a marble floor going red. This is the most powerful man in the world, and he is dying in the building he rebuilt. The strange part isn't that they killed him, it's that he saw it coming and walked in anyway. Because by then, the Rome he built had already swallowed the Rome he loved. To understand that morning in March, you have to understand a paradox. Julius Caesar didn't fall because his enemies were stronger than him. He fell because he had already won, completely. And winning was the one thing the Roman Republic could not survive. Every step that made him a god in the eyes of the people made him a monster in the eyes of the Senate. And he knew it. That's the part that haunts you. He was born into an old family that had run out of money and influence. The Julii claimed descent from the goddess Venus, but the rent was still due. Rome in his childhood was already cracking. Generals marched on the city. Lists of names were posted in the forum, and the men on those lists were hunted down by sunrise. Young Caesar nearly ended up on one of those lists. The dictator Sulla wanted him dead for refusing to divorce his wife. He went into hiding in the hills, sleeping in a different house each night, paying bribes to stay one step ahead. He was barely 19. When friends finally convinced Sulla to spare him, the old dictator gave a warning. In this boy, he said, there are many Mariuses. Marius had been the last general to turn Rome against itself. Sulla was telling Rome, this one will do it again. Caesar left the city. He sailed east, chasing experience, money, and a name. Pirates captured him near the coast. They demanded 20 talents of silver for his release. He laughed at them. He told them he was worth at least 50. He sat among them for weeks reading them poems, telling them he would come back and crucify every last one of them. They thought it was a joke. Once free, he raised a fleet, hunted them down, and crucified them exactly as promised. That story tells you everything. The charm, the arrogance, the patience, and the absolute willingness to finish what he started. He came home and started climbing. He spent money he didn't have on games for the people, on feasts, on lavish public spectacle. He understood something the old senators didn't. Rome was no longer ruled by tradition. It was ruled by tension. The mob in the streets, the soldiers in the legions, the merchants in the forum. They were the new power. And Caesar spoke their language. He borrowed staggering sums. By his late 30s, his debts could have ruined 10 ordinary men. He didn't care. He was betting everything on a future where he was too important to fail. He needed a province. He needed a war. He needed an army that answered to him and no one else. He got Gaul. What followed were 8 years that rewrote the map of Europe. Caesar marched into a patchwork of tribes and forests and turned it into a Roman frontier. He fought the Helvetii in open plains. He chased Germanic warbands back across the Rhine. He built a bridge across that river in 10 days, just to prove he could. He sailed to Britain, a place most Romans believed barely existed. He didn't conquer it. He didn't need to. He had stepped off the edge of the known world and come back alive. And he wrote about it. Every campaign, every clever maneuver, every dramatic turn, dispatched home in clean Latin prose for the citizens of Rome to read aloud in the forum. He was the first general in history to control his own legend in real time. The Senate watched in horror. Reports came back of whole regions subdued, of fortresses taken, of tribes broken. The climax came at a place called Alesia. The Gallic chieftain Vercingetorix had pulled the tribes together for one final stand inside a hilltop fortress. Caesar built a wall around the fortress. Then, when a relief army of tens of thousands of Gauls came to break the siege, he built a second wall facing outward. He fought a war on both sides of the same trench at the same time and won. Vercingetorix rode out the next morning, threw down his weapons at Caesar's feet, and surrendered Gaul to Rome forever. Caesar was now the richest man in the Roman world. He had a battle-hardened army that worshipped him, and he had a problem. His command was ending. The Senate wanted him back in Rome as a private citizen, where his enemies were waiting with lawsuits that would destroy him. He had a choice: lay down his army and face ruin, or keep it and march on his own country. The boundary was a small river called the Rubicon. By Roman law, no general could cross it with troops. To do so was treason. War. He stood on the bank a long time. The legend says he muttered that the die was cast and wrote across. It wasn't a moment of madness. It was the only move left on the board he had built for himself. Pompey, his old ally and son-in-law, fled south. The Senate fled with him. The greatest republic the world had known abandoned its own capital because one man and one army were walking down the road. What followed was a civil war fought across 3 continents: Italy, Spain, Greece, Egypt, North Africa. At Pharsalus in Greece, outnumbered nearly 2-1, Caesar shattered Pompey's army in a single afternoon. Pompey fled to Egypt hoping for shelter. The Egyptians, trying to win Caesar's favor, killed him on the beach and presented his head as a gift. When Caesar saw it, by most accounts, he wept. The man had been his friend before he was his enemy. He stayed in Egypt. He met a young queen named Cleopatra. He put her on the throne and fathered a son with her. For a Roman to entangle himself with a foreign queen was already scandalous. To do it openly while a war was still being fought was something else entirely. Rome began to whisper that he no longer thought of himself as a citizen, that he thought of himself as a king. He came home in triumph. 4 triumphs, actually, one after another, each grander than the last. Gaul, Egypt, Pontus, Africa. Banners, captive princes in chains, wagons of gold, soldiers chanting his name. He was named dictator, then dictator for 10 years, then dictator for life. He reformed the calendar. The one we still use, in modified form, 2,000 years later carries his name in July. He extended Roman citizenship. He planned harbors, libraries, drained marshes, a grand campaign east against Parthia. He pardoned his enemies. Men who had fought against him at Pharsalus walked free, were given offices, were welcomed back into the Senate. This was meant as mercy. It was received as humiliation. A king pardons. An equal does not need to. Now, before we walk into that final morning, I want to ask you something. Caesar genuinely believed he was saving Rome. His killers genuinely believed they were saving Rome. So who was right? The man who held it together by becoming a king, or the men who killed him to stop that very thing? Tell me in the comments. I read them, and I'm curious whose side you land on once you've heard the whole story. Because what happens next is where the man and the legend split apart forever. A statue of him went up among the statues of the old kings of Rome. Some called it honor. Older senators called it a warning. At a public festival, his lieutenant Mark Antony offered him a crown in front of a crowd. Caesar pushed it away. Antony offered it again. He pushed it away again. Maybe it was theater. Maybe it was a test. Either way, every senator in that forum saw a man weighing a crown in his hands. His fatal flaw was not greed. It was not cruelty. It was certainty. He believed deep down that no one would dare touch him, that his clemency had bought him love, that his record protected him. He dismissed his Spanish bodyguard. He walked the streets of Rome with no protection. He told a friend that a sudden death was better than a fearful life. He had stopped seeing the Senate as men. He saw them as administrators of his vision. But inside that Senate, a conspiracy was forming. Some hated him. Some feared him. Some had loved the Republic so long they could not imagine living without it. At the center was Marcus Junius Brutus, Caesar's friend. Some whispered his almost. A man Caesar had pardoned, promoted, and trusted. Brutus came from a family that, by legend, had thrown the last king out of Rome centuries before. That history sat on his shoulders like a stone. His mother had been Caesar's lover. The bond between them was old and deep, which is exactly why the others wanted him. If Brutus struck, the killing would not look like jealousy. It would look like Rome itself reclaiming her freedom. The morning of the Ides of March, his wife begged him not to go. She had dreamed of his death. Omens, the chroniclers say, were everywhere. A soothsayer had warned him weeks earlier to beware that very day. Walking into the Senate, Caesar saw the man in the crowd. "The Ides of March have come," he said, smiling, and the soothsayer answered quietly, "Yes, but not yet gone." Inside the chamber, the senators rose to greet him. One stepped forward with the petition. The others closed in. The first blade came from behind, then a second, then they were everywhere. He fought at first. The accounts say he struggled, swung, tried to break free, until he looked up and saw Brutus. Whatever he said in that instant, if he said anything, has been argued about for 2,000 years. What is not argued is what he did next. He stopped fighting. He pulled his toga up over his face, and he let them finish. He fell at the base of a statue. The statue was of Pompey, the man he had defeated to become master of Rome. The conspirators ran out into the streets with bloody knives, shouting that the Republic was free. They expected cheering crowds. They got silence, then fear, then fury. Because the Romans in the street did not see liberators. They saw senators who had killed the man who fed them, paid their soldiers, and made their city the center of the world. Within days, the city was burning. Within weeks, the conspirators were fleeing for their lives. Mark Antony gave a eulogy that turned the mob against the killers. Caesar's will was read aloud, and in it, he had left gardens and money to the people of Rome. The men who killed him to save the Republic had handed it its death warrant. What followed was another civil war, then another, the Republic. The conspirators had died, for never came back. Caesar's adopted heir, a sickly 19-year-old named Octavian, would step into the vacuum. Within 15 years, he would be the master of the Roman world. He would take a new name, Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. The thing Caesar was killed for becoming, his successor simply became, and called it peace. For 500 years after that morning in March, Rome was ruled by emperors. Every one of them carried a version of his name as a title. Caesar, Kaiser, Tsar. The word for ruler in half the languages of Europe is just his name, worn smooth by centuries of mouths. His calendar still hangs on your wall. The month of his birth, Quintilis, was renamed July in his honor and never changed back. His writings on the Gallic War are still read by schoolchildren learning Latin. 2,000 years later, the same crisp prose he used to manage his own legend. And every dictator since whose youth the language of saving the nation to seize absolute power has been walking, knowingly or not, in his footsteps. He didn't destroy the Republic alone. It was already dying. He was the man honest enough or arrogant enough to admit it. Maybe that was his real flaw. Not ambition, not pride, but the refusal to pretend. The Senate killed him to keep a republic that was already a corpse. He had simply stopped lying about it. And maybe that is why on the floor of that chamber he pulled the toga over his face. Not from shame, not from fear, but because he understood, in that final second, the joke of it all. He had won every war, he had crossed every river, he had outmaneuvered every rival on 3 continents. And in the end, the only thing that could kill the man who built Rome was the Rome he built. If this story hit you, do me a favor and hit the like button. It genuinely helps these videos find the people who love this kind of storytelling. And if you want more conquerors, more emperors, more men and women who changed the world and were broken by it, subscribe to the channel. There are more on the way. I want to hear from you in the comments. Who should we cover next? A Roman emperor who lived in Caesar's shadow. A warlord from the steppes. A queen who outthought every man in her court. Tell me the name. The most requested ruler in the comments goes into the queue. Coming up next on the channel, a different kind of ruler, not a Roman, not a king by birth. A man who started life with nothing but a horse and a name and ended it sitting on top of the largest land empire the world has ever seen. You probably already know who I'm talking about. His story is waiting on the other side of that subscribe button.